In my family, I had 5 half-sisters and 1 half-brother. I was the youngest of all of us. My dad, he was an incredible father. Him and I did everything together. He was my best friend, but he was a very busy man with his job, and I knew that he was essentially the one supporting our family. Teresa Milbrand is my biological mother. I wholeheartedly believe that my dad loved his wife and trusted her like anyone would in that kind of a relationship. And with him working, she was my primary caregiver. And so I think that he really, truly just trusted her like he should have. I think I really started to want to call her Teresa because I don't ever feel like she was a mother to me. She was the reason I lost everything in my life and was basically abandoned, and I don't feel like she deserves that title. I always kind of explained her as like Jekyll and Hyde, as like she, in a public setting, she was the mother that we wanted. She was loving and gave us hugs and held our hands. But then like behind closed doors, it was, you stayed away from her. I remember like falling off of my bike one time, and she was the only one that was home, and I ran inside with a scraped knee. And I remember hurting really bad, and she, was sitting on the couch, and she kind of looked at me and told me, like, you know where the first aid kit is, you know where things are, I don't know why you're crying.
Doesn't even look that bad.
She didn't care. It was always just very an emotional detachment is what it felt like. She didn't play with me. She didn't want to have any type of interaction whatsoever with me at all. She really didn't do baths, showers, putting us to bed, things like that. We were kind of always just fending for ourselves.
You need to grow up.
I do remember feeling like there was something wrong with me, that she couldn't give me that kind of love. I would see my other friends with their moms, and their moms were so involved and so like interactive with them and just very visibly loving with like hugs and holding hands, and that was never the mother that I saw. And the only times I really felt like she did was if other people were around, like visibly watching, and that was kind of tough because it was a back and forth of, do you do this because you love me now, or do you actually feel this way? It was very like hot and cold, and it was hard to get a grip on like which version of her was the real version. What I remember of her most is the walking on eggshells, not wanting to do anything wrong, leaving anything out of place, just honestly doing anything that you felt like could set her off. She would be normal, and then she would throw huge fits over things.
Who did this? Huh?
There was one time that we walked into the kitchen, and she had a spoon that was left in a bowl of milk in the sink, and she brought it in and was like whipping it around.
Is this acceptable to you? Is it?
It was like gross and had milk on it. And she's like, this is disgusting. Do you think I have the time to clean this up? No, this is your job. You clean it up. And was going about how everybody was lazy and she's not the only person that lives here and quit acting like this, and made a huge deal out of it. And it was just out of nowhere. And it just became so frequent that it was almost normal. Like, you just became accustomed to Teresa's tantrums. And then she broke a coffee mug because it was left on the counter.
How's this?
She just dropped it on the floor. Quite honestly, me nor my siblings seemed to want to be around her.
Make yourselves useful. I'm done.
A lot of the time we would spend in our rooms because we were afraid to mess anything up or to have any form of interaction with her, because we knew that if we did anything at all, she'd find a way to belittle us or yell at us, and it was just not something we wanted to do or deal with. So in this photo, I want to say I was like 4 or 5, and it was Halloween. This photo makes me kind of emotional a little bit. It's looking at this, like, the happy Hannah, the little Hannah that I often fight for, just was so carefree and so happy. Talking about the little version of me is like, that's a tough one for me. I feel like it's just like, I want to hug her. I wish I could just squeeze her and tell her that although things were going to be really, really hard, you get to be that again, and you'll get to be able to be the happy Hannah again. You can tell I was just like a happy-go-lucky little girl, and she had absolutely no idea what was coming, and it was coming so soon. I just remember Teresa almost like switching to a different person, and it was just more emotionally there for me. Like, if I was crying, it wasn't figure it out on your own. It was like the coddling and the hugs and the, oh, it's okay, I'll take care of you kind of thing. How's that? She started to help with like bath time, which was never a thing. Whereas this now was like, she was very much in there helping me brush my teeth, and also like putting me to bed and tucking me in and laying there with me. And that was just something that she's never done before. Time for bed. And I remember thinking, like, what changed? And I remember also thinking it had to have been me. Like, maybe I'm different, and maybe now I'm more lovable, and so that's why she's being this way. But I was happy with it. It was what I always wanted. Now I get to have this love and attention from her, and I'm making her happy. And I'd never seen her happy before, and it felt good. Looking back and knowing that like it was all a lie, and thinking about the person who's supposed to love me unconditionally was beginning to essentially ruin or destroy her child's life, it makes me physically ill. And for her to be able to finish what she was doing and get a good night's sleep like that, it's disgusting to me. Like, it truly is. Teresa was very much the person that cared about her self-image. And I think that she wanted people to look at her, and she liked that kind of attention. She used to take me to department stores to get professional pictures. She was like showing me off to everyone, and that wasn't something she did before. She would be like, oh, isn't my daughter beautiful? I remember a woman had complimented how beautiful I was and was talking to me about my dress and the things I was wearing. And that was when Teresa like interjected and said, oh yeah, she's beautiful. She's my $1 million baby. She always referred to me as like her $1 million baby. She's gonna make me so much money someday, I know it. I had never really liked to be the center of attention. I feel like I was being forced into doing it, but I did it to make her happy. Doing what makes her happy is what's gonna get the love I want. So I'll do whatever it takes to make sure that she loves me. It makes me sick thinking that she saw me as a price tag and not as her baby. Looking back, I really feel like that was the start of her plan. I think that that was the start of her realizing like, oh, I could make a lot of money off of this child, and like, I'm gonna see how far I can absolutely take this. There was a lot of interactions that I witnessed with her and my siblings. She used to call my older sister Cinderella and would tell her that she was only good for cleaning and she wasn't good for anything else. She used to call her like ding dong and stupid, very like generic, mean, just nasty names, and would laugh and think it was funny when it was visibly hurting her. I remember her always saying very belittling things about her to kind of almost create this wedge that she wanted between the two of us. And my older sister decided that she had enough and she was going to go live with her biological father. My sister was upstairs in her bedroom packing her things. Her and I were very close, and I didn't want her to leave, and I was begging her not to go and like crying and telling her to stay.
Don't leave me alone with her.
That really set Teresa off.
I have to.
She didn't like it. She felt like she was losing some sort of control with her.
You want to leave? You want to act like an adult, make decisions for yourself?
And Teresa came in the room and was taking my sister's things and was throwing them in a trash bag and telling her that she wasn't to interact with me anymore.
You get nothing!
And she was ripping up pictures of like my sister and I together. And she looked at my sister and said to her, I need you to look at Hannah and tell her that you don't love her anymore. And she wouldn't do it. And so Teresa started just screaming at the top of her lungs at her. And I remember I got very scared. I remember running to my dad, who had just gotten home about in the middle of all of this happening. And I ran straight to him as soon as I heard his voice.
What's wrong?
I was standing behind his legs because I was scared. My mom's yelling, and she picked that mirror up and threw it at me and my dad. There was this loud crash, and I remember looking back and seeing it stuck in the wall. Glass everywhere, just shattered everywhere, and thinking like, oh my gosh, I can't believe she just threw that at the both of us.
What the hell's the matter with you?
My dad was helping my sister get all of her things, and he was consoling her. I remember sitting in the corner, terrified, like crying and shaking and not knowing, like, how long is this gonna last? When he was around, it was a sense of relief. You only had a certain amount of time until he was gone, and anticipating him leaving was like one of the things I hated the most, is knowing he was gonna leave and I was gonna have to be with her again for several days. Without him was extremely nerve-wracking because he seemed to be the peacekeeper. I didn't understand anything that the doctor and Teresa were talking about. And we left, and I remember Teresa saying on the phone that something is wrong with Hannah and you need to come to the house immediately. Once we get home, there were several people there. Teresa's mother was there, and her husband, my grandfather, was there. My dad was there. I sat and just kind of waited to find out what was happening. And she tells all of us that they did a CAT scan and they found a small spot on the base of my spine, the tip, like the size of the tip of a pen. And they believe that it was leukemia.
Our little girl is sick.
And everybody just got very emotional or very quiet. I remember my dad crying immediately. And also trying to hold it in. And I was very confused. I have never heard of that word before, so I had no idea what that meant. It was terrifying. My dad kind of stood up. He came over and he's like, why don't you and I take a break from all of this?
Let's take a walk.
I remember asking him, like, Dad, what does leukemia mean and why is everybody so sad? And he said, leukemia is like cancer. And I understood cancer because I had lost somebody in our family from that. And I knew what that meant. And I was like, but I don't feel sick. Like, I feel as though I just have a stuffy nose. How is that cancer? And he was like, well, it's not for you to understand. We'll figure this out together and it'll be okay. And I remember sitting there, things just flying through my mind and wondering, like, what does this mean? And am I gonna die? Like, I know that that's what happens if you have this, and am I gonna die? So this is a picture of me during my illness and my dad and Teresa. This is at my birthday party. I want to say it was my 6th birthday party. And yeah, this is heavy. I feel like when I look at this, I see so much sadness in that little girl's face. She looks scared. It doesn't feel like a genuine smile. It looks like I was doing it because I had to. Hannah, and this looks like the drained of life version. But like looking at Teresa, she looks so happy, and it makes me very sick. And this giant Band-Aid on my chest that is just so sad. I wish I could just go back and fight for little Hannah. She needed somebody to fight for her, and I feel like I wish I could. I wish I could protect her and just let her know that it was gonna be okay, that this wasn't gonna be the end, although I thought it was. It wasn't. Teresa had worked in the medical field. I don't know like the full degree of her healthcare background, but I do remember her being a home health nurse. Teresa was explaining to me at this appointment, you're gonna have chemo treatments. And when you have chemo treatments, you're gonna feel kind of nauseous and tired, having headaches. And then also explaining to me that after so many amount of chemo treatments that I would lose my hair. And it was just so abrupt. We just went from I have a cold to now you have leukemia, and it just didn't seem real. And I was devastated. Teresa was essentially saying, I know that you're afraid of the doctor, so when we go to the doctor, I'm gonna give you medicine to help you get through these appointments. And I didn't think anything of it. And then she'd given me this little blue pill, and I remember it tasting absolutely horrible. And she was like, okay, this is gonna make you sleepy, but you won't remember any of the doctor's appointments. It'll all be okay. I'll take care of you. And it would be maybe like 5 or 10 minutes after I would take the medicine, I would get extremely tired and I couldn't fight it, and I would fall asleep. And time would go by and I'd wake up very groggy. Oh, like you're awake. We went to the doctor and this is what happened. I accepted all of that she was saying. I knew in my heart, I thought that she was doing what was right and she was gonna take care of me, right? She's my mother, she's gonna take care of me. So I didn't ask any more questions about the medication. It was really early in the morning. I was getting ready to go to school and I needed to brush my teeth, and I had turned the light on to the bathroom, and I looked in the mirror, and I had basically no hair. And I remember screaming.
Mom!
And Teresa came running into the bathroom and was like, "What's wrong?" And I was like, "Oh, my hair is gone. What happened? Where did it go?" And she had said that, "Oh, I told you this was gonna happen."
Hannah, we talked about this.
I remember kind of like freezing and feeling like, this isn't real. Like, that I knew that I was gonna lose it, but it was like, I had figured I would lose it in chunks, and I would have been more prepared, and like I would have known it was happening. And for me to just, I went to bed with a head full of hair, and I wake up and now it's just in patches, was such a like shock that I just couldn't understand. And it was devastating. I just was begging her, like, I don't want to go to school. You can't make me do this anymore. Can I stay home? Please don't make me go there. Please don't make me go through this anymore. And I don't want people to make fun of me and tell me I look like a little boy. I don't want that. So I went to school and I cried the whole way there. And when we got there, I walked into my classroom and everybody was staring at me. And I remember in that moment thinking, I never want to have to come back here again. And I knew I was going to have to relive that feeling every single day. No matter what I said, no matter how I reacted, no matter how heartbroken, devastated, emotional I was, it didn't matter. All that mattered was what she said, and what Teresa said went. So I think at that point, honestly, I stopped fighting back. One thing that honestly kind of bothered me was that we were going to so many benefits. One of the girls I was friends with, her dad was a firefighter, and they had like a spaghetti dinner for us. And people came and ate, and all the money went towards my family. And then I remember going into public places. There was always a coffee can with like this awful picture of me that people could donate to. It was like, I couldn't escape. No matter where I was, it was like, it was always right there, like haunting me. And also it's hard as a kid that we're getting all this money, but like nothing is changing and nothing is happening. That people are donating all this money and I'm just staying sick. And that was very confusing for me. I started seeing a therapist for death counseling when it was probably about 6 or so months into the illness, and Teresa started saying that the end was becoming near, that I was getting worse, and that death probably wasn't far away. And I remember her asking me to draw how it felt the day that I found out about the tumor or the cancer, and what I remember, how I was feeling. To see that I was like such sadness, like there's so much sadness in this, and that I like at such a young age was so intuitive in remembering how hard and emotional that day was, but also so confusing. It's tough.
Ma'am, she's sick. She hit her head.
My dad had gone straight to the nurse's station, was like, you need to help her. She has leukemia, she's very ill, and this is where she goes for treatments. We're not from here. just kind of very much so running through everything so quickly, so hysterically. Then they left me in this little room that I was in, and they were getting ready to prep me for stitches. And I was crying, and I wanted him in there.
Where's my dad?
I was yelling at the nurses saying, like, don't touch me until I have my dad outside of the room. You could visibly tell that Teresa and my dad were arguing, and I could hear vaguely what they were saying. And I remember my dad saying to Teresa, they can't find any record of Hannah. What's going on?
I can't remember every place that we stopped.
In that moment, I don't think I was thinking anything. I just remember looking at him and seeing how terrified he was, and it scared me. She was angry, her hands were going, her face was getting red. And that was when Teresa said, I know that she sees certain specialists. They can be kind of hard to locate. Hannah was in an emergency situation. She was kind of going around the actual answer. And I remember she was very anxious.
They don't have a single file on our daughter. How do you explain that?
Relax.
Kind of felt like she was just grasping at whatever she could. I think this was the moment that my dad truly realized something was really wrong, and he was about to be in a very bad situation.
What have you done, Hannah?
But wasn't sure what he was gonna do or how to handle it or what to say or what to believe. I think at that moment he realized something wasn't right. It seemed to be like everything after that moment was just like chaos. It was very soon after that, everybody knew the truth. My grandmother had come to pick me up from school. When we had gotten home, my dad was anxiously pacing the floor and chain smoking, and I had never seen him act like that.
Hey, sweetie.
He said, I have to tell you two things. And he was like, and some of them are going to be hard, but some of them are good things. And I was like, okay. And he was like, so what do you want me to tell you first? And I was like, the good things. And he said, well, you're not sick. And I remember being so confused and relieved and happy and sad at the same time because it was so confusing. What do you mean?
You're gonna be okay.
But that makes me have to tell you the sad thing, and that is that your mom has done something really bad. And she has lied, and she had taken money from people, and people are really angry and upset with her because she told a lie about you and that you are sick when you're not. And she made it all up. And as a child, wrapping my mind around that was impossible. And I was so happy that I wasn't going to die. Like, I couldn't imagine, like, I was so happy that it wasn't gonna end, I wasn't gonna die. But why did my mom do this to me? Why did she lie about this? And for what? Trying to understand the reasoning behind it was just something at that age I could not wrap my brain around. And I just remember really focusing on being happy and like, I'm not gonna die. I can go back to my normal life. Everything's gonna be fine now. I was just, I'm not dying. And that's all I cared about. I wasn't sick anymore. Everything was gonna go back to normal, and then all of a sudden I'm just ripped away from my family again. The social worker that ended up taking me away from my father that night, she essentially took me to a foster family. was being taken away from them, and there was nothing I could do to stop it from happening. And it was so scary. And I think I remember it being in that home and thinking, waiting for my dad, that, dying seemed almost like it would have been the better option at that point, because it was like, I knew what heaven was beautiful. This was not. This was like my worst nightmare. It was like I was living my biggest fear. After a few weeks of being at my foster home, my foster family let me know that both of my parents had been arrested. They didn't say that they were charged with anything. They just told me that they were both arrested and put in jail. As far as I know, my dad's attorney was wanting me to stand trial and kind of defend my father, but my father decided that I had been through enough, that I was too young to stand such a grand trial. I don't think there was anybody really in the community who believed that either one of them was innocent. I think they were grouped together very quickly. As far as the crimes that were committed, I feel like Teresa is definitely the one who would be fully responsible, and I think that he is innocent in this situation. I feel like Teresa knew that my father wasn't involved, and I think she had the opportunity to speak up and say that. But I think that she didn't want to essentially go down for this by herself. It's so easy to believe, on an outside looking in perspective, there's no way he has no idea. And I think she knew that. And I think all along, that was her plan. I think she knew all along that essentially she wouldn't have to go down by herself, and it wouldn't all be on her. And I think that it made it easier for her to do those things. All right, I'm gonna need a second on this, I'm sorry. All right, I'm gonna put this over, I can't look at it, I'm sorry. All right, well. Looking at that makes me so sad. To think that how scared he had to have been. And how sad he had to have been. He didn't do anything wrong. And essentially, he knew that he was gonna have to spend the next 5 years of his life not watching his daughter grow up. After just finding out that she wasn't gonna die, he was essentially losing her anyways. It breaks my heart for him. I know that was a really hard time for him. And I often, sometimes I feel a sense of guilt, honestly, to think that he essentially went to prison because he was trying to protect me. And that's the right thing to do, he did right by me, and he was just trying to protect me. But sometimes, I feel guilty. I wish he wouldn't have done that. I wish he would have let me have the opportunity to try to save him too. If I had to seriously be honest about her end goal of all of it, and I really think what she was trying to get out of it is, I really, truly believe that Teresa was out to kill me. I think I couldn't tell you why. I wish I did. I wish I knew why. It's a question that will forever haunt me. I do think she was willing to sacrifice my life for anything that was going to make hers better. I think that she wanted everything for herself. Everything was always about her, and I think that me as a sacrifice didn't seem like a sacrifice to her. It seemed like the only way to get what she needed. Yeah, it's heartbreaking. It is the purest form of being evil. Like, she truly just was an evil person. I don't think it feels fair at all. I think that, if I'm going to be completely honest, I think she deserved a much longer sentence. I truly feel like I serve a life sentence to what she did to me. I fight that battle every day. I fought that battle for a long time, and I probably will for the rest of my life. And for her to only spend 6 years, I just feel like it's not fair. It doesn't seem right, and it's kind of scary to think that, like, she just gets to live a life like nothing ever happened. It's really unfair. My father and I are extremely close. He is my very best friend. I could not have gotten to the point that I am today without his love, his support, his undying love for me. He has never wavered in who he is. And to this day, he is the most amazing father, and even better, he's the most amazing grandfather to my babies. I now have a beautiful family, a loving husband, and finding him was something I never thought would happen. And I think my ultimate fear was, could I be a mother? What was it like to be a mother? I never had one. I didn't know what that looked like. And then I had both of my beautiful children, and never for a second did I question what it would be like to be a mother. It was so instinctual, and I have never felt such love. But I know in my heart that God gave me the children I have to prove to me that I am capable of so much love, and I am a fantastic mother and a wonderful wife. I have just such a beautiful life. I am so blessed to have the things that I do, and I never thought that I would have this life. You know, little me never thought that we would even make it past 6, and now I am creating a life so much further past that, and it's amazing.
It's very clear that he has the personality traits to become a serial killer.
On the Hanover County 911.
The man above us just threw the woman over the balcony. She's laying on the ground now. She's very bloody.
It's heartbreaking. No kid is supposed to watch that happening.
Everyone knows the sound. It is a jarring, dissonant screech that cuts through the silence of a quiet room, interrupts the music on the radio, or blares suddenly from the television screen. When our mobile phones vibrate violently and emit that unmistakable, piercing emergency tone, a collective breath is held. We reach into our pockets. We look down at our glowing screens, and we see the stark text. A description of a vehicle. A license plate number. The physical description of a missing child. We're looking at an Amber Alert. For most of us living in the modern world, this system is an invisible shield, a vital piece of public safety infrastructure designed to mobilize millions of eyes and ears in a matter of seconds. It is a system born of profound necessity, one that has directly saved the lives of more than 1,200 children across the United States alone, and its model has been adopted by dozens of countries worldwide. It is a testament to the power of rapid, unified communication. But systems do not emerge from the void. They are not created in a vacuum. They are forged in the fires of unimaginable grief, born from the darkest corners of human cruelty. The name AMBER is now known universally as an acronym, standing for America's Missing Broadcast Emergency Response. But long before it was a capitalized acronym, before it was a piece of federal legislation signed into law by a president, and before it was a sound that jolted us from our daily routines, Amber was a little girl. Amber Hagerman was 9 years old. She was a child living in Arlington, Texas, in the year 1996. To truly understand the gravity of this case, we must deliberately strip away the monumental legacy of the alert system and force ourselves to look at the reality of the victim. In the expansive, often desensitizing annals of true crime, victims frequently run the risk of becoming mere catalysts for a broader narrative. They become the inciting incident in a larger story about police procedure, groundbreaking legal reform, or massive cultural shifts. But we must never forget that Amber Hagerman was not born to be a symbol. She was a vibrant, living, breathing child with a family who adored her, a future that was entirely stolen, and a voice that was brutally silenced. She loved her bicycle. It was a pink bicycle, a seemingly insignificant detail that would later transform into a haunting emblem of her sudden, violent disappearance. When we look back at the harrowing events that unfolded over a few short days in January of 1996, we are forced to confront the terrifying, paper-thin fragility of safety. We are forced to look at how quickly, how absolutely seamlessly, the mundane transitions into the catastrophic. Arlington, Texas, sits nestled comfortably between the major metropolitan hubs of Dallas and Fort Worth. In the mid-1990s, it was a sprawling, thriving suburban environment. It was a place where neighborhoods felt insulated from the harder edges of the world, where children were encouraged to play outside until the streetlights flickered on to signal the end of the day, and where the geographical boundaries of a child's world were largely defined by how far and how fast they could pedal their bicycles. The year 1996 belonged to an era just before the digital age fully consumed and fundamentally altered our daily lives. There were no smartphones in every pocket. There were no GPS tracking devices attached to children's backpacks. Independence was granted in physical space. A child riding a bike to a nearby convenience store, a local park, or a friend's house was not an act of parental negligence. It was the standard, accepted rhythm of American childhood. Parents trusted the unspoken, collective social contract of the neighborhood. They trusted that their children would be looked out for by the community, and they trusted that they would return home safely when they were told. January 13th, 1996, was a Saturday. It was a weekend afternoon, the kind of day that stretches out endlessly before a child, filled with nothing but unstructured time and possibility. The weather in Texas during the deep winter months can be unpredictable, sometimes biting and harsh, but on this particular afternoon, it was suitable enough for outdoor play. Amber, at 9 years old, and her younger brother James, who was just 5 years old, decided to take their bicycles out for a ride. They pedaled away from the familiar comfort of their home, navigating the quiet, residential streets of their Arlington neighborhood. Their chosen destination for the afternoon was an abandoned grocery store. To an adult driving by, an empty parking lot of a closed-down commercial business is merely an eyesore, a depressing testament to local economic shifts or failed enterprise. It is a place to be ignored. But to a child on a bicycle, a massive, flat expanse of unbroken, weathered asphalt is nothing short of a paradise. It is a blank canvas for racing, for drawing with chalk, for riding in wide, uninterrupted circles without the constant, looming fear of neighborhood traffic. It is a place of temporary, joyous freedom, a concrete playground where the rules of the adult world temporarily fade away. The siblings arrived at the abandoned grocery store parking lot and spent their time doing exactly what they had set out to do. They rode their bikes. They existed in that pure, unadulterated state of innocent childhood play, completely detached from any concept of danger. But eventually the dynamics of the afternoon shifted. James, being only 5 years old, decided he had had enough. He was ready to go home. The exact reasons for his departure are the small, easily forgotten details of childhood. Perhaps he was tired from pedaling, perhaps he was simply bored, or perhaps he just wanted to return to the warmth and comfort of his house. James turned his small bicycle around and began the short, familiar journey back to their residence. Amber chose to stay behind. She wanted to ride her pink bicycle just a little bit longer. It was a profoundly ordinary decision. It is the exact type of choice children and parents navigate every single day in every neighborhood across the world. There was no sense of impending dread, no ominous warning hanging heavy in the cool winter air. There was only a 9-year-old girl enjoying the afternoon breeze, completely alone in an empty parking lot. In the meticulous study of true crime, investigators and storytellers often focus heavily on timelines. Timelines are the rigid, unforgiving chronological structures upon which the entire truth of a terrifying event is hung. We look at timestamps, we analyze witness statements, and we dissect the chronological progression of minutes and seconds to understand exactly how a crime occurred. In the tragic case of Amber Hagerman, the timeline is not just a structural tool for investigation. It is arguably the most terrifying, incomprehensible element of the entire narrative. From the exact moment that 5-year-old James pedaled away and left his older sister alone in that sprawling parking lot, a silent, invisible countdown began. It was a countdown that no one could hear, a rapidly closing window of safety that would permanently alter the course of history for missing children everywhere. The entirety of the horrifying event that followed, the absolute and total destruction of a family's universe, took less than 8 minutes. 8 minutes. It is a duration of time so exceptionally brief that it defies our understanding of how a tragedy of this magnitude can unfold. 8 minutes is the time it takes to casually brew a morning pot of coffee. It is the time it takes to listen to 2 songs on the radio while stuck in traffic. It is a fragment of our day so utterly insignificant that it usually passes completely without our notice. We lose 8 minutes effortlessly, constantly, every single day. But in those specific, fateful 8 minutes on the afternoon of January 13th, 1996, an unfathomable, predatory evil intruded upon the quiet innocence of Arlington, Texas. As Amber rode her pink bicycle alone on the cracked asphalt, she was entirely unaware that she was in the presence of a monster. Perhaps the predator had been watching her from a distance, stalking his prey, waiting for the younger brother to leave. Or perhaps it was a crime of pure, terrifying, spontaneous opportunity, a horrific intersection of time and place. What is undeniably known from the factual record is that a vehicle approached the young girl. It was a pickup truck, described later by the sole witness as being black or dark in color. The driver behind the wheel was a male, believed to be white or of a light Hispanic complexion, estimated to be somewhere between 20 and 30 years old, possessing a medium, average build. This man, a nameless, faceless phantom who has successfully evaded justice and law enforcement for nearly 3 decades, did not hesitate. He did not attempt to gently lure the child with deceptive promises or tricks. He operated with a brazen, explosive, and violently sudden force. He pulled his dark truck up close to the young girl. He threw open the door and stepped out of the cabin. In broad daylight, in the middle of a suburban environment, he lunged at Amber. He physically and aggressively tore the 9-year-old girl off of her pink bicycle, using overwhelming adult strength against a helpless child. The struggle was immediate, visceral, and incredibly brutal. Amber did not go quietly into the dark. She fought for her life with every single ounce of desperate strength her small, 9-year-old body possessed. She screamed. It was a scream of sheer, absolute, paralyzing terror. That scream pierced the quiet Saturday afternoon air, echoing violently across the empty expanse of the asphalt parking lot. And miraculously, tragically, it was heard. Jimmy Kevill, a resident who lived nearby and happened to be in the vicinity of the abandoned grocery store, heard the chilling, unmistakable sound of a child in mortal danger. He looked out and witnessed a living nightmare unfolding in real time right before his eyes. He saw the dark pickup truck idling on the pavement. He saw the man aggressively shoving the little girl into the confined cabin of the vehicle. Mr. Kevill saw Amber fighting back with everything she had. He watched in absolute horror as the young girl kicked and screamed, desperately hitting the passenger side window of the truck from the inside, crying out into the void for someone, anyone, to help her. It is a visual that fundamentally haunts the human mind, a terrified child trapped behind the glass of a stranger's vehicle, watching her familiar world slip away as an unknown, violent monster takes total physical control of her destiny. Jimmy Kevill did exactly what any responsible, deeply concerned citizen would do in that heart-stopping moment. He did not hesitate. He immediately reached for a telephone and frantically dialed the police to report the abduction. He provided the information as the crime was actively concluding, or mere seconds after the dark truck aggressively tore out of the parking lot. The authorities were alerted almost instantaneously. The bureaucratic machinery of emergency response was initiated without delay. But the dark pickup truck, carrying the terrifying stranger and the desperately screaming child, sped away, vanishing seamlessly into the vast Texas landscape as if swallowed by the earth itself. The police arrived at the scene with urgent, flashing speed, their sirens cutting through the afternoon air, but the crucial 8 minutes had already irreversibly expired. The dark truck was gone. The unidentified man was gone. Amber Hagerman was gone. All that remained in the sprawling, painfully empty parking lot of the abandoned grocery store was a solitary, heartbreaking piece of physical evidence. A small, pink bicycle, lying silently on its side on the cold, unforgiving asphalt. It was completely abandoned, a stark, silent testament to the extreme violence that had just ruptured the peaceful afternoon. The wheels of the bicycle may have still been slowly spinning in the breeze. The transition from a peaceful weekend day to a full-scale, desperate missing person emergency was instantaneous and absolute. The local Arlington police, who would soon be joined by the vast resources of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, stood at the precipice of what would quickly become one of the most frustrating, massive, and deeply haunting criminal investigations in the history of American law enforcement. They had an eyewitness account. They had a physical description of a dark pickup truck and a vague sketch of a suspect. They had the pink bicycle left behind at the crime scene. But they did not have Amber. And as the winter sun began to slowly set on Arlington, Texas, that evening, casting long, dark shadows over the abandoned parking lot, a desperate, frantic, and massive search effort began. It was a search fueled by the desperate, clinging hope that they could somehow find her before the unimaginable happened. But the timeline was already working brutally against them. Amber Hagerman was now entirely at the mercy of a phantom, a man whose face remained unseen, whose license plate was unread, and whose capacity for profound cruelty was about to be revealed to the world in the most devastating manner possible. This is the story of an abducted child. This is the tragic, agonizing origin of a public safety system that changed the world. This is the unsolved murder of Amber Hagerman. When the wail of the police sirens finally faded into the distance and the flashing red and blue lights were extinguished, an immense, suffocating silence descended upon the abandoned grocery store parking lot in Arlington, Texas. The sudden absence of noise was profound, a stark and chilling contrast to the desperate screams of a 9-year-old girl that had shattered the air just moments before. In the immediate aftermath of Amber Hagerman's violent abduction, the physical space she left behind felt entirely surreal. The sprawling expanse of weathered asphalt, once a carefree playground for a child on a weekend afternoon, had instantly transformed into a sterile, terrifying crime scene. The only remaining testament to the innocent life that had occupied that space just a fraction of an hour prior was her small, pink bicycle. It lay carelessly discarded on its side, resting exactly where the brutal force of the attacker had separated the child from her childhood. To the untrained eye, it was just a piece of metal and rubber, but to the investigators arriving on the scene, and soon to the rest of the world, that pink bicycle became an agonizing symbol of extreme vulnerability. It represented the exact, horrifying intersection where a mundane, everyday activity violently collided with the darkest depths of human predation. The bicycle was carefully collected, photographed, and cataloged, marking the definitive beginning of a nightmare that would permanently alter the landscape of the local community and the nation at large. The weight of this tragedy cannot be fully comprehended without examining the agonizing reality of the victim herself and the agonizing circumstances of her separation from safety. Amber Hagerman was just 9 years old. At 9, a child exists in a delicate, transitional phase of human development. They are old enough to articulate their thoughts, to understand the basic boundaries of their neighborhoods, and to crave the small, incremental tastes of independence, like riding a bike slightly further from the front door. Yet, they remain fundamentally fragile, lacking the physical strength and the cynical awareness required to defend themselves against a calculated, adult predator. Amber was a child who was entirely unprepared for the sheer malice that awaited her. And perhaps the most heartbreaking element of this specific timeline is the presence and the subsequent absence of her younger brother, James. At just 5 years old, James was driven by the fleeting whims of a toddler. He rode his bike with his sister, shared in the joy of the afternoon, and then, dictated by a simple desire to return home, he pedaled away. The absolute randomness of this decision is a haunting reality that hangs heavy over the entire case. Had James stayed, had he delayed his departure by even 10 minutes, or had he convinced his sister to leave with him, the entire trajectory of history would be different. Instead, a 5-year-old boy rode home, completely unaware that he would be the last family member to ever see his older sister in a state of safety and happiness. As the sun set on January 13th, the Arlington Police Department, recognizing the extreme, time-sensitive severity of a stranger abduction, immediately escalated their response. They did not wait. They coordinated directly with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, rapidly assembling a massive, unprecedented task force dedicated entirely to locating Amber and identifying the man in the dark pickup truck. The machinery of law enforcement was fully mobilized. Telephones began to ring incessantly as desperate pleas for information were broadcast across local television and radio stations. Over the course of the investigation, this task force would receive and meticulously process more than 7,000 individual tips and leads from an anxious, deeply unsettled public. Investigators would physically track down and examine thousands of dark-colored pickup trucks matching the vague description provided by the sole eyewitness, Mr. Jimmy Kevill. They scoured registration records, knocked on countless doors, and interviewed anyone who might have been in the vicinity of the abandoned grocery store. The community of Arlington entered a state of collective paralysis. Parents locked their doors, children were kept strictly indoors, and a heavy, suffocating blanket of dread settled over the previously tranquil neighborhoods. But despite the monumental effort, despite the thousands of leads and the tireless work of seasoned detectives, every single avenue of investigation seemed to evaporate into thin air. The dark truck and its driver had vanished without leaving a single discernible trace behind. For the family of Amber Hagerman, the ensuing days were an unimaginable descent into a psychological hell. The passage of time in a missing child case is not measured in hours or minutes. It is measured in the agonizing, unbearable silence of a ringing telephone that brings no answers. Saturday night bled into Sunday morning. Sunday faded into Monday. With every sunrise, a desperate, fading glimmer of hope was renewed, only to be crushed by the setting of the sun and the realization that another day had passed without her safe return. The terror of not knowing, of imagining where she was, what she was enduring, and who was with her, is a form of psychological torture that defies adequate description. But the most horrifying aspect of this wait, a detail that would only be revealed later by the grim science of forensics, was the devastating reality of what was actually happening during those prolonged, agonizing days. Amber Hagerman was not killed immediately upon her abduction. The subsequent medical examination would conclude a fact so deeply disturbing that it remains difficult to process. The 9-year-old girl was kept alive for approximately 2 full days after she was violently thrown into the cabin of the dark pickup truck. For 48 hours, a terrified child from Arlington, Texas, was held captive by an absolute monster. The implications of this timeline are staggering and profoundly sickening. It means that while the massive task force was desperately searching, while the community was holding candlelight vigils and praying for her safe return, and while her family was pacing the floors of their home in sheer agony, Amber was still breathing. She was alive, enduring unimaginable terror and suffering at the hands of a predator whose identity remains completely unknown to this day. This 2-day period of captivity elevates the crime from a horrific act of sudden violence to a sustained, calculated campaign of pure depravity. It speaks to a killer who possessed a secure location, a chilling level of confidence, and an absolute absence of human empathy. Where she was taken, what she was forced to endure during those 2 days, and the exact sequence of events that led to the final, fatal act of violence are details locked away forever in the mind of the perpetrator. As the search stretched into its 4th agonizing day, the natural world itself seemed to reflect the dark, turbulent reality of the situation. The weather in northern Texas took a sudden, violent turn. A massive, severe thunderstorm rolled across the region, bringing with it a deluge of heavy, relentless rain. The skies opened up, pouring massive volumes of water onto the streets of Arlington and the surrounding rural areas. To the residents, it was merely a fierce winter storm, but to the investigation, this catastrophic weather event would prove to be a devastating, insurmountable obstacle. The torrential rain saturated the earth, flooded the streets, and dramatically swelled the local waterways, turning quiet, meandering streams into violent, rushing torrents of muddy water. Nature, entirely indifferent to the suffering of the local community and the desperate efforts of law enforcement, was blindly preparing to aid a killer. On the morning of Wednesday, January 17, 1996, for days after Amber was violently snatched from her pink bicycle, the agonizing wait came to a definitive, shattering conclusion. A local man, engaging in the mundane, everyday routine of walking his dog, was navigating the area near Forest Hill Creek. This small, relatively secluded waterway was located approximately 6 kilometers away from the abandoned grocery store parking lot where the abduction had taken place. As the man walked along the muddy, rain-soaked banks of the creek, his attention was drawn to something unnatural in the water. Amidst the debris and the rushing currents swollen by the recent, violent thunderstorm, he made a discovery that would forever haunt him and bring the desperate search for the missing 9-year-old girl to a tragic, devastating halt. He had found the lifeless body of Amber Hagerman. The grim reality of the discovery was entirely devoid of any peace or dignity. The crime scene at Forest Hill Creek was a chaotic, muddy landscape, severely compromised by the natural elements. When law enforcement and forensic teams descended upon the area, they were met with a scene of unimaginable brutality. The autopsy and the subsequent medical examinations would confirm the absolute worst fears of the investigators and the family. Amber had been subjected to severe, horrific sexual assault during her period of captivity. The final, fatal act that ended her young life was as savage as it was cowardly. The medical examiner determined that the cause of death was multiple deep, severe lacerations to her neck. She had been brutally slaughtered, discarded like refuse into the cold waters of the creek. But the tragedy of Amber Hagerman's death was compounded by a devastating forensic catastrophe. The violent Texas thunderstorm that had battered the region in the days prior had actively conspired to protect her killer. When the unknown man dumped her body into Forest Hill Creek, the water levels were rising rapidly. The heavy, relentless rain and the resulting rushing currents of the creek acted as a destructive, natural cleansing agent. The fast-moving water violently washed over the victim's body, systematically destroying, diluting, and carrying away almost all of the crucial, microscopic biological evidence that investigators desperately rely upon to solve violent crimes. The tiny, invisible clues that usually betray a killer, a stray fiber from a car seat, a single strand of hair, or, most importantly, the perpetrator's DNA, were ruthlessly swept away by the merciless currents. The water erased the physical trace of the monster. The investigators, who had worked tirelessly for 4 days chasing thousands of leads, were now faced with a victim but almost entirely stripped of the forensic roadmap needed to find her killer. The rain had washed the scene clean, transforming a horrifying murder into an unsolvable phantom puzzle. The agonizing reality set in that the very elements of nature had acted as an accomplice to a brutal child murder. Amber was found, but the truth of who took her, who tortured her for 2 days and who finally ended her life with a blade, was seemingly carried away downstream, lost forever in the muddy waters of Forest Hill Creek, leaving behind a legacy of profound grief and a terrifying, enduring mystery that still echoes loudly 3 decades later. The discovery of Amber Hagerman's body in the murky, rain-swollen waters of Forest Hill Creek was not the conclusion of the investigation. It was, in many ways, its most agonizing beginning. For the detectives at the Arlington Police Department, the transition from a rescue mission to a homicide investigation was a heavy, soul-crushing burden. They were no longer searching for a child who might be held captive in a basement or a quiet house on the edge of town. They were now tasked with the daunting, nearly impossible objective of hunting a predator who had successfully utilized the natural elements to scrub his path clean. The forensic reality was a nightmare of missed opportunities and erased clues. In the world of criminal justice, the first hours, the golden window, are paramount for the collection of trace evidence. When the body of a victim has been immersed in rushing, mud-heavy water for any duration, the microscopic markers that link a suspect to the crime are almost invariably lost. The water had acted as a solvent, stripping away the fibers, the foreign hairs, and the seminal fluids that would have provided the definitive DNA profile required for a modern prosecution. For the task force, the loss of this forensic evidence meant that they had to rely entirely on the fallible, fragmented, and emotionally charged world of witness testimony and circumstantial leads. The investigation became an immense, grinding process of attrition. They looked at the thousands of tips that had flooded their switchboard since the initial abduction call from Jimmy Kevill. They categorized these leads, cross-referenced them with local traffic patterns, and attempted to build a profile of a man who, by all accounts, had slipped through the cracks of society entirely unnoticed. There was no clear motive to work from. There was no obvious connection between the perpetrator and the family. This was an act of random, predatory violence, the kind that strikes fear into the heart of every parent because it suggests that no one is truly safe and nowhere is truly secure. The detectives spent months, and then years, interrogating the logistics of the crime. They mapped out the distance from the abandoned grocery store parking lot to the creek. They calculated the timing, the potential routes the dark pickup truck could have taken, and the types of individuals who owned such vehicles in the Arlington area at the time. They sat in dimly lit rooms, staring at grainy maps and endless stacks of paperwork, hoping for that one singular breakthrough, that one inconsistency in an alibi, or that one piece of information that would finally pull the mask off the face of the monster. Yet, despite the overwhelming resources poured into the case by the Arlington Police and the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the trail grew cold with terrifying speed. The lack of a clear suspect became a source of profound frustration for everyone involved. In the absence of a name, the killer became a ghost, an ethereal presence that haunted the local community. Every dark truck seen on a highway, every man seen lurking in a parking lot, became a potential suspect. The psychological toll on the investigators was immense, as they carried the weight of a young girl's final, terrified hours on their shoulders. They had looked at the evidence, the physical trauma inflicted upon her body, the callousness of her abandonment, and they had looked into the eyes of a grieving mother and a father who had been robbed of a future with their child. The need for justice was not just a professional obligation. It became a personal crusade for the men and women who had dedicated their lives to this case. They revisited the scene at the abandoned parking lot hundreds of times, replaying the abduction in their minds, trying to find a detail that had been overlooked, a camera angle they hadn't considered, or a witness who might have been too frightened to come forward in the immediate, chaotic aftermath of the crime. The process of the investigation was also deeply defined by the limitations of the era. This was 1996, an era when DNA profiling existed, but was still in its relative infancy compared to the sophisticated, high-resolution techniques that would emerge decades later. The samples they had managed to secure were few, and they were degraded by the environment of the creek. These samples sat in cold storage, preserved in small vials, waiting for a technological evolution that might eventually yield a truth that was, at that moment, invisible to the human eye and the scientific methods of the time. The detectives knew that their best hope for a resolution might lie not in the present, but in the distant future, when the tools of forensic science had finally caught up to the audacity of the crime. They filed their reports, documented their failures, and kept the case files open, refusing to let the name of Amber Hagerman slip into the category of cold case, where so many other victims' stories were left to languish in obscurity. As the months turned into years, the case evolved from a frantic search into a quiet, persistent, and lonely vigil. The investigators grew older, the technology in the labs became more precise, and the society around them shifted, but the fundamental question remained the same: who is the man in the dark pickup truck? The mystery of his identity became an obsession, a persistent, itching discomfort in the back of every investigator's mind. They tracked down individuals who had been on the periphery of the case, persons of interest who had popped up in the initial waves of the investigation, and they scrutinized their histories for any hint of violent, predatory behavior. They checked for connections to other abductions in the state of Texas and beyond, looking for a pattern, a signature, or a string of crimes that could lead them to a serial offender. But the killer of Amber Hagerman appeared to be an outlier. He did not seem to operate with the public spectacle of other notorious criminals. He operated in the shadows, leaving no trail, leaving no signature, and leaving behind only the profound, lasting, and agonizing legacy of his victim. This lack of resolution created a specific kind of agony for the community. In the absence of a trial, there was no platform for the family to confront their tormentor. There was no courtroom drama to provide a semblance of closure, no opportunity to hear the monster speak, no chance to demand an explanation for the depths of his cruelty. The case became an open, weeping wound that never had the chance to scab over. The investigation was not a straight line to a verdict. It was a labyrinthine path that led back to the same, devastatingly empty place. The police, however, continued to treat the case with the solemnity of a fresh murder. They updated their files. They ran old samples through new, advanced DNA processing technology, and they maintained an active dialogue with the public, constantly hoping that someone, somewhere, would finally break their silence. They knew that there was a witness to the killer's actions, or perhaps a confidant, a spouse, or a friend who possessed the missing piece of the puzzle. They understood that the barrier between an unsolved mystery and a solved crime was often just one secret, one conversation, one piece of information held by someone who had been afraid or unaware of its significance for 3 decades. The persistence of the detectives in the face of such a monumental void is the most harrowing aspect of the investigation's history. They lived with the details of the crime, the visual records of the abduction, and the post-mortem reports of the violence, yet they stayed the course. They were motivated by a fierce, protective love for a girl they had only come to know through the tragedy of her death. They understood that every day the killer remained free was an injustice that compounded the original trauma, and they worked in the stubborn, quiet knowledge that if they stopped, the truth would be lost forever. The investigation into the murder of Amber Hagerman was a masterclass in the exhausting, often unrewarding nature of police work. It was an exercise in extreme patience and absolute dedication, fueled by the hope that in the rapidly advancing world of genetic genealogy and forensic innovation, the killer's shadow would finally be cast into the light. The detectives were waiting for that one scientific advancement, that one digital breakthrough that would allow them to take the few, compromised samples they had kept safe for so many years and finally assign a name, an identity, and a face to the predator who had walked away from Forest Hill Creek that cold morning in January. The story of the investigation is a story of faith in justice, of the refusal to accept the permanence of a mystery, and of the unwavering belief that, even 3 decades later, the truth is still out there, waiting in the data, waiting for the right tool, and waiting for the right moment to be brought home to the family that has been waiting for an answer for more than 30 years. They were, and still are, holding the door open for the truth to walk through, no matter how long the vigil lasts. The pursuit of justice for Amber Hagerman has not merely been a matter of standard investigative procedure. It has evolved into a persistent, high-stakes battle against the unrelenting erosion of time. As the years stretched into decades, the investigative focus shifted from the immediate, frantic collection of witness reports and physical evidence to the realm of cutting-edge forensic science and the potential of cold case preservation. Throughout the long, quiet years, the Arlington Police Department remained steadfast in their commitment, holding on to the few remnants of evidence that had survived the destructive, muddy surge of Forest Hill Creek. The primary focus of their ongoing labor has been the application of evolving DNA technology. In the mid-90s, forensic science was limited by the quality and quantity of biological material recovered from a crime scene. When the torrential rain washed the body of the young victim, it effectively scrubbed away the traditional markers, skin cells, hair follicles, and fluids that would have been needed for a standard PCR analysis. However, as the 21st century dawned, the field of genetics began to leap forward, and the detectives who held the case files in their custody watched these advancements with a keen hope that the past could finally be unraveled. By the time the 25th anniversary of the abduction arrived in January of 2021, the landscape of crime solving had been fundamentally altered by the advent of investigative genetic genealogy. This revolutionary technique allows investigators to take extremely small or degraded amounts of DNA and compare them against massive, publicly available genetic databases. It is a process that has successfully identified serial killers and rapists who had evaded detection for half a century. The detectives in Arlington looked at the vials of evidence they had carefully curated, knowing that the potential for a breakthrough was higher than it had ever been. They began working with specialists to determine if the biological material still contained enough viable genomic data to create a profile. It was a process of extreme delicacy. Every attempt to extract or amplify the DNA carried the risk of exhausting the limited sample entirely. The challenge was exacerbated by the fact that the material had been subjected to the harsh, organic environment of the creek, which had caused significant degradation to the strands of human DNA. Despite these immense hurdles, the spirit of the investigation remained undeterred. The detectives knew that they were essentially chasing a ghost, a predator who had likely moved on, aged, or perhaps even died in the intervening years. But their mission was not just about the final arrest. It was about the fundamental requirement that the truth of such a heinous crime be unearthed. The investigation turned its gaze toward the possibility of reconstructing a family tree based on whatever trace markers could be salvaged from the evidence. They were essentially looking for the genetic relatives of the monster, hoping that by identifying a distant cousin, a nephew, or a grandchild of the killer, they could map out a path to the individual himself. This, however, is a process that requires a tremendous amount of time, computational power, and a degree of luck that the case had been denied since the beginning. The forensic team worked under the heavy understanding that any profile they could produce would be incomplete, a mosaic of possibilities that would then require boots-on-the-ground traditional detective work to confirm. The frustration of the investigation lies in the duality of the situation. The massive, crushing weight of the evidence that was lost in 1996 against the sophisticated, clinical, and hopeful nature of the research being conducted today. Every time a new test is run, every time a new lead is suggested by the genealogical data, it brings with it a surge of adrenaline followed by the cold, sobering reality of the obstacles. The detectives who have rotated onto this case over the last 30 years have all come to understand the unique burden of the Hagerman file. It is not just another case, it is the case that defined modern child safety in America. Every one of them has felt the pressure of the public's gaze and the agonizing, silent demand of a family that has never stopped searching for an answer. They have interviewed former neighbors, tracked down individuals who owned dark pickup trucks in North Texas during the mid-90s, and vetted every tip that has come through the phone lines in the decades since. Some of these leads had been promising: men with histories of violence, individuals who matched the physical profile provided by Mr. Kevill, or people who had been reported by others for suspicious behavior. Each one was tracked, investigated, and cleared with a level of rigor that speaks to the dedication of the Arlington police. The investigative process also required a deep, analytical look at the timeline of the abduction itself. Detectives have gone over the events of January 13, 1996, with a microscopic eye. They have studied the layout of the parking lot at the abandoned grocery store, the geography of the surrounding streets, and the likely transit routes that would allow a perpetrator to disappear into the vast, sprawling suburban fabric of the Dallas-Fort Worth metroplex. They have scrutinized the behavior of the suspect, a man who felt confident enough to commit a kidnapping in the middle of a Saturday afternoon, in a location that was visible to nearby residents. This suggests an individual who is not necessarily a resident of the immediate neighborhood, but someone who possessed a degree of local knowledge, someone who knew the routes, the back roads, and the locations where they could easily avoid detection. The investigation has also had to consider the possibility that the perpetrator was an offender with a history of similar crimes, someone whose past might contain the clues to his identity if only it could be linked back to the kidnapping in Arlington. This led the investigators to expand their net, looking into regional and national databases of missing persons and unsolved sexual assaults, constantly checking for signatures or behavioral patterns that mirrored the events of that winter weekend. Throughout this long, arduous journey, the investigators have maintained a public-facing commitment to the truth. They have used the media, the news outlets, and the internet to keep the case in the public consciousness, recognizing that the key to solving a cold case is often a detail held by someone who has forgotten, or perhaps someone who has finally decided that the time to keep a secret has come to an end. They have reached out to those who may have known the suspect, an ex-spouse, a former coworker, a sibling, or an old friend, people who might have seen the dark truck, heard a suspicious comment, or noticed a change in behavior in the days following the murder. The investigation has been a delicate, persistent dance between modern science and the human element. The science provides the data, the possibilities, and the leads, but the human element is what will ultimately bring the killer to justice. The detectives have learned that for all the advancements in genetic technology, there is no replacement for a witness coming forward with the truth. The atmosphere of the investigation today is defined by a strange, quiet intensity. The initial, frantic chaos of the mid-90s has subsided, replaced by a steady, methodical, and profoundly patient approach. The files are not dusty, they are active. The digital databases are continuously refreshed. The detectives who manage the file are fully aware of the history of the case. They know the name, they know the face from the photographs, and they feel the presence of the young girl who was taken from the parking lot. They operate with the sobering knowledge that the killer has enjoyed 30 years of life that were stolen from the victim. The investigative process, while largely driven by the potential of DNA, is also anchored in the moral imperative to ensure that the memory of Amber Hagerman is not just an image on a warning sign, but the catalyst for a completed, righteous, and definitive conclusion. They work in the hope that one day, the laboratory results, combined with a crucial tip, will finally align. They work knowing that the monster is still out there, either as a living human being or as a ghost, and that the story of the abduction is not yet finished. The investigation of the murder of Amber Hagerman remains an ongoing, vital, and necessary pursuit of the truth, standing as a testament to the fact that while a case may go cold, the need for justice remains burning, constant, and absolutely unyielding. It is a work of slow, grinding persistence that continues every single day in the heart of Arlington, Texas. The legal framework that would normally serve as the climax to a true crime narrative, the courtroom trial, the presentation of forensic evidence, the testimony of experts, and the final rendering of a verdict, is a structure that remains tantalizingly absent in the case of Amber Hagerman. For 30 years, the halls of justice have waited for a suspect to stand before them, yet those halls remain empty. There is no trial to recount, no sentencing hearing to describe, and no moment where a judge has banged a gavel to declare the conclusion of this long-standing agony. In many cases, the absence of a trial is a failure of the legal system, but in the case of Amber, it represents the profound, persistent, and haunting nature of a crime that has thus far defeated the reach of the law. Because no suspect has ever been identified, apprehended, or charged, the process of adjudication has never begun. This creates a unique form of social and personal limbo. The community of Arlington, the law enforcement agencies, and the victim's family have had to live with the knowledge that the person responsible for the horrific violence committed against an innocent 9-year-old girl has not been forced to answer for his actions within the walls of a court of law. There is no public record of his name, no transcript of his confession, and no finality that usually comes with a conviction. However, the lack of a traditional trial does not mean the case has been ignored by the justice system. Rather, it has transformed into a sustained, out-of-court battle for the truth. If one were to imagine the hypothetical proceedings of a trial for the murder of Amber Hagerman, One would have to rely on the cumulative weight of the evidence gathered over 3 decades, even if that evidence has yet to be presented to a jury. A prosecutor would start by presenting the timeline established on that fateful Saturday afternoon in January of 1996. They would detail the testimony of Jimmy Kevill, the witness who stood on the porch of his home and watched the violent abduction unfold. His testimony would serve as the foundational pillar of the case, illustrating the sheer brazenness of the perpetrator. The prosecutor would describe the dark pickup truck, the average, unassuming physical appearance of the man, and the terrifying 8-minute window of opportunity that was exploited. They would recount the desperate struggle that the young girl put up, the way she kicked at the passenger side glass, and the way the vehicle sped away with her trapped inside. This testimony would not just be a narrative of a crime. It would be a harrowing demonstration of the victim's fight for survival against an overwhelming, predatory force. Next, the prosecution would address the forensic tragedy of the case. They would acknowledge the catastrophic impact of the Texas thunderstorm that flooded Forest Hill Creek and effectively destroyed the biological markers that should have identified the killer. They would have to explain to the jury that, despite the best efforts of the investigators, the natural elements conspired to act as an accomplice to the murderer. They would present the medical examiner's findings, the horrific evidence of sexual assault, the signs of confinement during the 2 days she remained alive, and the brutal, final act of violence involving deep lacerations to the neck. In a courtroom, this would be the moment of collective silence, the point at which the absolute depravity of the act is laid bare for all to see. The evidence would be presented not as dry, technical data, but as the final, tragic chapter of a child's life. The prosecution would then transition to the massive, multi-year, multi-agency investigation that followed. They would highlight the 7,000 tips, the thousands of trucks that were checked, the exhaustive efforts to find a single, definitive piece of evidence that could link a suspect to the scene. This would be presented as a testament to the fact that the authorities never gave up, that they treated the life of Amber Hagerman as a matter of the highest national priority. Even without a defendant present, the impact of such a trial would be immense. It would force the public to confront the unresolved nature of the crime. It would provide the family of Amber with a platform to be heard, to speak about their loss, and to demand the answers they have been denied for 30 years. The emotional center of such a hypothetical trial would be the memory of the victim, not as a symbol of the Amber Alert system, but as the girl who loved her pink bicycle and who was taken in the prime of her childhood. The absence of the defendant would not necessarily diminish the impact of the proceedings. It would, in some ways, amplify the sense of injustice. The empty chair in the courtroom would be a constant, searing reminder of the work that remains to be done. It would represent the failure of the world to protect one of its most vulnerable citizens. Yet, the lack of a trial also underscores the primary duty of the justice system in a cold case, the pursuit of truth above all else. The justice system in this case has operated not through the mechanism of prosecution, but through the mechanism of endurance. The legal professionals involved have functioned as guardians of the file, ensuring that the evidence is preserved, that the legal pathways for an eventual arrest are kept open, and that no statute of limitations or procedural shift can bury the possibility of a future reckoning. They have acted as the bridge between the tragedy of 1996 and the hope of a resolution in the modern era. When forensic genealogy or new DNA techniques produce a result, the legal infrastructure is prepared to mobilize. They have the protocols, the warrants, and the strategic plans ready to execute, should a suspect be identified. This is the silent, ongoing work of justice in the shadow of an unsolved crime. It is a process that requires a steadfast, unrelenting faith in the ability of the truth to eventually surface. The result of the case, as it stands today, is an open, active file. There is no conclusion because there is no closure. There is no verdict because the trial has not yet been given a voice. The justice system, in this context, has become a mirror to the societal values that were born from the case. If the system was not able to catch the killer in real time, it has vowed to catch him through the long, slow, and meticulous application of the law over time. This is a commitment that defines the integrity of the Arlington Police Department and their partners in the FBI. They do not view the absence of a trial as a defeat. They view it as an unfinished business. Every day that passes without an arrest is a day that the system remains in a state of alert. They are, in a very real sense, waiting for the defendant to be brought before them so that the trial can finally begin. The lack of a courtroom finale is not an omission of the past. It is a waiting room for the future. The trial of the man who abducted and killed Amber Hagerman is a narrative that has yet to be written, and until that day, the system remains in a state of solemn, watchful, and determined waiting. The ultimate result of this case, therefore, is not the ending of a tragedy, but the continuation of a promise that the law will eventually find its mark, regardless of how much time has elapsed or how far into the shadows the killer has retreated. The courtroom doors remain unlocked, the files are kept at the ready, and the society at large, having learned the lesson of the girl on the pink bicycle, continues to stand in silent, vigilant support of the moment when justice will finally be delivered. The legacy of Amber Hagerman is a paradox that sits at the very heart of the American consciousness. It is a legacy defined by the absolute worst of human nature and, in direct response, the absolute best of human ingenuity and collective care. To view the case of Amber Hagerman only through the lens of her tragic murder is to miss the profound, structural transformation her death forced upon the world. The birth of the Amber Alert system was not a mere policy change. It was a fundamental shift in the social contract between the state, the media, and the citizenry. Before January of 1996, there was no centralized, rapid response mechanism to mobilize an entire population in the event of a child's abduction. If a child went missing, the search was confined to the immediate neighborhood, the local police department's resources, and the slow, fragmented communication of the pre-digital era. Amber's death broke that isolation. It proved that a child's safety was not just the responsibility of their parents or their local community, but a shared, urgent, and national imperative. The idea, first voiced by a concerned mother named Diane Simone, that a system used for severe weather warnings could be repurposed to save children, was as simple as it was brilliant. It recognized that in the moments following an abduction, time is the single most valuable and rapidly depleting currency. By utilizing the instantaneous reach of radio, television, and eventually, the digital networks of our cellular phones, the Amber Alert transformed millions of strangers into a vigilant, mobile, and collective search party. Since its implementation, the system has played a direct role in the recovery of more than 1,200 children. Each of those lives saved is a living testament to Amber. Every child who is returned to the arms of their family, safe and unharmed, is a direct result of the lessons learned from the terrifying events in Arlington, Texas. It is a legacy that has saved more lives than the most optimistic proponents could have imagined when the idea was first proposed, and it has set a standard for public safety that has been mirrored and adapted by countries all across the globe. However, the weight of this legacy is tempered by a lingering, inescapable sense of melancholy. The system bears the name of the girl who had to die for it to exist. Every time the shrill, discordant tone of an Amber Alert interrupts our day, we are reminded of the price of our modern vigilance. We are reminded that the shield we now carry was forged in the heat of an unsolvable crime. The existence of the alert system is a constant, bittersweet acknowledgement of a debt that can never be fully repaid. It is a reminder that while we have built a mechanism to protect the children of the future, we failed to protect the child of the past. The persistence of the unsolved murder of Amber Hagerman sits in stark contrast to the massive, undeniable success of the system that carries her name. It creates a dissonance that the public and law enforcement agencies have had to navigate for 30 years. We live in a world where the name Amber is a household term for safety, yet the killer of the girl named Amber remains a nameless, faceless ghost in the shadows. When we reflect on the case, we are forced to look at the fragility of our own security. The abduction of Amber Hagerman was not a crime of complex planning or hidden motive. It was an act of impulsive, predatory violence that occurred in broad daylight, in a suburban environment that appeared, by all outward metrics, to be safe. It serves as a permanent, chilling reminder that evil does not always operate in the dark or in the fringes of society. It can manifest in the most mundane, everyday settings. The lesson of Amber is not that we should live in a state of perpetual fear, but that we must maintain a state of informed, collective awareness. The system that now protects our communities is the physical embodiment of that awareness. It is a promise that we are not alone, and that when one of us is threatened, the entire society will move to act. This is the moral victory that has emerged from the depths of the tragedy, yet it is a victory that is always shadowed by the absence of justice for the initial victim. The persistence of the Arlington Police Department in the pursuit of the killer is a vital component of this reflection. The fact that the case has remained open for 3 decades, that the evidence has been preserved through evolving generations of technology, and that the detectives continue to treat the investigation with the same urgency they possessed in 1996 is a profound statement of integrity. It speaks to a commitment that transcends the simple parameters of a job. It is a recognition that the work is not complete until the truth is identified. This commitment honors Amber in a way that the alert system alone cannot. It refuses to accept the permanence of the killer's anonymity. It insists that even if the law was unable to intervene on that January afternoon in 1996, it remains fully committed to correcting that injustice, no matter how much time must pass. As we look toward the future of this case, we have to consider what justice would actually look like. In an era of advanced genomic science, where the past is increasingly becoming readable through the data of our DNA, the possibility of a late-stage identification is no longer a fantasy. The investigators are relying on the hope that the breakthrough is coming, that the right piece of information will finally align with the right forensic tool. But even if the killer is eventually unmasked, perhaps aged, perhaps near the end of his life, or perhaps revealed only after his death, the emotional resolution of the case will remain complex. The pain of the Hagerman family is a constant, a baseline reality that has existed for 30 years. The discovery of the truth will be a form of closure, but it will never be a form of healing. The damage was done on the day the pink bicycle was left behind on the asphalt, and no verdict, no sentencing, and no apology can undo the loss of a child. The final reflection on the case of Amber Hagerman must therefore center on the human capacity to transform grief into a force for good. The community of Arlington, the law enforcement officers, and the millions of people who've been alerted to the dangers facing children have all been impacted by this singular, devastating story. The narrative has become a part of the cultural fabric of modern America. It is a story that is told in police academies, in newsrooms, and in the homes of parents who teach their children to be aware of their surroundings. It is a story that has saved lives. The tragedy of Amber Hagerman is that she had to be the victim, but her endurance as a symbol of safety is a testament to the fact that we have not forgotten her. We remember her not just as a name on an alert, but as a 9-year-old girl who was stolen from her family, who fought for her life, and whose memory has been used to shield generations of other children from the same dark fate. The story is not over. The investigation continues, the memory remains, and the vigil persists. As long as the detectives keep the files on their desks, as long as the public remains responsive to the alerts, and as long as we continue to strive for a world where no child is ever truly alone, the memory of Amber Hagerman will remain a living, breathing force for protection. It is a profound, solemn, and everlasting legacy. We owe it to her family, and to every child who has been saved by the system that bears her name, to keep the truth in our sights. We look back with the pain of what was lost, but we look forward with the promise that we will continue to do everything in our power to keep the world safe. The girl on the pink bicycle left us a legacy that transcends time and space, a legacy that will continue to guide our efforts to protect the most vulnerable among us for as long as we exist. The case remains open, the search continues, and the memory of Amber Hagerman will never, ever be allowed to fade into the quiet, forgotten reaches of the past. The final chapter of this narrative is not written in the ink of a completed file, but in the enduring, stubborn hope of those who refuse to let the darkness of 1996 have the final word. We exist in a world that has been profoundly shaped by the death of Amber Hagerman, a world where the infrastructure of our society has been hardwired to prioritize the protection of the innocent. Yet, for all the success of the Amber Alert system, there remains a persistent, aching void where the resolution of the murder itself should be. This tension between the global, life-saving triumph of her legacy and the localized, intimate failure to find her killer, is the defining characteristic of this case. It is a story that refuses to be neatly summarized or relegated to the dusty archives of history. It is, instead, a living inquiry, a constant, low-frequency hum of accountability that continues to resonate within the halls of the Arlington Police Department and within the hearts of those who carry the memory of the young girl on the pink bicycle. To look at the case today is to look at the intersection of extreme patience and the relentless, accelerating pace of technological evolution. The investigators who currently hold the responsibility for the Hagerman file are not working with the same limitations that handcuffed their predecessors decades ago. They are working with the awareness that the scientific landscape is shifting beneath their feet, providing new methods to query the past. This is not a passive waiting game. It is an active, ongoing effort to force the data to surrender its secrets. They are utilizing tools that were once the stuff of science fiction: genealogical mapping, mass data integration, and advanced, high-sensitivity DNA sequencing. Every new technological development represents a new potential key for an old, rusted lock. The dedication shown by the authorities, in a time when many other cold cases are left to fade into obscurity, is a profound tribute to the victim. It is a promise that, no matter the duration of the silence, the investigation remains a priority, not because of the fame of the case, but because of the inherent, undeniable right of a murder victim to be vindicated by the law. Moreover, the case serves as a mirror to our own collective evolution regarding child safety. Before Amber, the idea of a nationwide, real-time alert system for abducted children was largely inconceivable. The scale of the coordination required between law enforcement, media outlets, and the public seemed insurmountable. Yet, the tragedy of her abduction broke the bureaucratic and social inertia that had previously prevented such systems from being realized. Her death forced a confrontation with the uncomfortable reality that our standard approaches to public safety were insufficient. The subsequent implementation of the Amber Alert did more than just create a tool. It created a shared civic responsibility. It taught a generation of citizens that they are all participants in the safety of their communities. It turned every observer into a potential sentinel. The system's success, evidenced by the more than 1,200 lives saved, is the ultimate refutation of the idea that individual tragedy cannot lead to systemic, global good. It is a transformation of the most painful, visceral grief into a concrete, life-saving utility. Yet, we must be careful not to let the success of the system overshadow the continued, agonizing reality of the crime. There is a danger in looking at the Amber Alert as the end of the story. It is not. It is the beginning of a different kind of vigilance. The killer who snatched Amber from that parking lot in Arlington did not just take a life. He stole a future and left behind a trauma that has radiated through the decades, affecting her family, her community, and everyone who has ever learned her name. To truly honor Amber is to hold two contradictory things in our minds at once: the massive, life-preserving success of the system that bears her name, and the unresolved, haunting failure to bring her murderer to justice. Both are true. Both are necessary to understand the full weight of her legacy. The alert system is the armor we have built to protect our children, but the unsolved case is the scar that reminds us of why we needed that armor in the first place. As we consider the future, we have to recognize that the pursuit of truth is not always a linear progression. In a cold case that has spanned 30 years, progress often comes in sudden, unexpected bursts, triggered by a piece of information that has finally surfaced or a new, unforeseen application of a scientific process. The possibility remains that the truth is hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right perspective or the right person to articulate it. This is why the case must stay open, why the dialogue between the police and the public must continue, and why the story of Amber must be told and retold. By keeping her memory alive in the public consciousness, we ensure that the window of opportunity for a breakthrough remains open. We ensure that if someone anywhere has information that could identify the man in the dark pickup truck, they feel the weight and the encouragement to come forward. The legacy of Amber is, in this way, a self-sustaining mechanism of hope. The emotional resolution of this case may never look like a standard, cinematic conclusion. There may not be a dramatic courtroom confrontation or a sudden, cathartic confession. The reality of the passage of time, the aging of potential witnesses, the blurring of memories, and the potential death of the perpetrator means that justice might eventually take a form that is quieter, more clinical, and perhaps less satisfying to the human need for traditional retribution. But the truth itself, once uncovered, will still be a victory. The simple act of identifying the predator, of assigning a name to the phantom, would be a profound, historical correction. It would close the chapter on the mystery, even if it cannot fix the damage done. It would provide the family with a definitive answer they have sought since the day the pink bicycle was found on the asphalt. The goal of the investigation, therefore, is not just to close a file, but to complete a narrative that has been left open for far too long. Finally, we must reflect on the nature of the legacy we leave behind. The case of Amber Hagerman is a permanent fixture in the history of crime and justice, a reference point for everything that has been done to improve the safety of our children since 1996. It is a cautionary tale, a blueprint for systemic reform, and an enduring mystery all at once. The girl who loved to ride her bicycle in the sunshine has become the silent guardian of our modern, interconnected world. She is the reason we look at our screens when the alarm sounds. She is the reason we pay attention to the descriptions of vehicles and the names of the missing. She is the reason we, as a society, have collectively decided that the abduction of a child is a crisis that demands the undivided attention of every single one of us. Her life was short, and her death was traumatic, but her impact is immeasurable. The story does not conclude with a neat period at the end of a sentence. It concludes with an ellipsis, a lingering silence that suggests more is yet to come. The investigation continues with a quiet, steady resolve, powered by the belief that the truth is persistent and that it will, eventually, reveal itself. We remain in a state of shared, watchful vigilance, honoring the girl who is taken by doing everything we can to ensure that no other child shares her fate. The pink bicycle in the abandoned parking lot may be a memory now, but the spirit of the girl who rode it is woven into the very fabric of our public safety infrastructure. We remember Amber not just because of the tragedy, but because of the resilience she has inspired in others. We keep the light of the investigation burning because we believe in the possibility of truth, the necessity of justice, and the power of a memory that refuses to fade. The path forward is long, and the obstacles remain significant, but the commitment to the journey is total. As long as there is the possibility of an answer, as long as there is the potential for a breakthrough, and as long as there is a society that has learned to care for its most vulnerable, the search for the killer of Amber Hagerman will endure as a vital, necessary, and hopeful pursuit. This is not just a true crime story. It is a profound testament to the human capacity to survive, to learn, and to turn the darkest experiences into a protective shield for those who come after us. As we reach the final stage of this long and agonizing exploration, we must pause to consider the weight of the silence that has spanned these 30 years. The case of Amber Hagerman has become more than a mere subject of true crime study. It has ascended into the realm of a modern, tragic archetype. It is a story that exists in the minds of millions as a cautionary tale of innocence lost, a testament to the brutal, unpredictable reality of human cruelty, and a benchmark for the collective resolve of a nation. Yet, beneath the layers of legislation, the triumphant statistics of the Amber Alert system, and the vast, bureaucratic machinery of federal investigation, there lies a fundamental, unyielding question that keeps the file open. Why? Why her? Why that moment? And most importantly, who was the shadow that walked out of the darkness, claimed a life, and then retreated back into the void without leaving a single, undeniable trace of his identity? This question is the anchor of the entire investigation, the core of the agony, and the driving force behind the persistence of the Arlington Police Department. The passage of time has a way of blurring the edges of memory, of turning living, breathing people into historical figures, and of softening the sharp, jagged edges of trauma. But for those closest to the case, time does not function with such kindness. For the family of Amber, the years are not merely a chronological sequence. They are a long, continuous vigil, an unwavering period of waiting that has been marked by milestones, anniversaries, and the constant, gnawing absence of a resolution. To walk through the life of a case like this is to witness the evolution of humanity's capacity to cope with the unthinkable. We have seen how a community, shattered by a singular act of violence, chose to build a monument to its victim not in stone or bronze, but in a systemic change that has fundamentally improved the safety of children worldwide. This is the greatest triumph of the story, that the grief was not wasted. It was channeled into a mechanism that has demonstrably saved more than 1,200 lives, turning a singular moment of horror into an enduring, protective force. Yet, we must reconcile this global success with the local, painful reality of the unsolved murder. There is a deep, existential discomfort in knowing that the system designed to protect others exists primarily because of the failure to protect one. This dissonance is what gives the story of Amber its haunting power. It is why we cannot simply celebrate the success of the alert system and move on. We are tethered to the past by the lack of closure, by the unresolved nature of the violence, and by the refusal to accept that a predator can walk away from such a crime and live the rest of his life in freedom. The investigation, therefore, is not just about the technical application of forensic science. It is a moral obligation. It is the assertion that justice is not subject to a statute of limitations, and that the value of a life is not diminished by the distance of years or the difficulty of the search. Every day that the detectives in Arlington spend reviewing the evidence is an act of defiance against the anonymity of the killer. We often talk about the search for justice as if it is a destination, a final point where the truth is revealed and the perpetrator is punished. But in cases of this magnitude, justice is something that is cultivated in the daily, unglamorous, and often invisible labor of investigation. It is found in the meticulous re-examination of decades-old samples, the patient building of genealogical networks, and the constant, open dialogue with the public. It is a process that requires a specific kind of faith, the faith that the truth, no matter how deeply it has been buried by time, by weather, or by the deliberate deception of a monster, still exists. It is the belief that the physical reality of the crime left a residue, and that with enough persistence and the right advancements in technology, that residue can be brought back to the surface. This is the fuel that keeps the engine of the investigation running, even after the initial, frantic leads have long since gone cold. As we look at the broader implications of the case, we see that it has fundamentally changed how we understand the threat to our children. It has moved the conversation from a state of private, parental anxiety to a state of public, communal awareness. We are no longer isolated in our efforts to keep our children safe. We are part of a massive, digital and physical network of vigilance. This shift is the direct inheritance of Amber's tragic journey. The pink bicycle, once a simple toy, has become a symbol of a lost era of innocence and a reminder of the vigilance that is now required in a more complex, connected world. We are more aware, more cautious, and more communicative than we were before. We have learned to recognize the signs, to trust our instincts, and to prioritize the safety of the vulnerable above almost everything else. This is the positive, transformative power of the story, but it is one that we must carry with the sobering knowledge of the cost. The conclusion of this story is not something that we can dictate. It is something that must be earned, piece by piece, through the slow, grinding work of the investigators. We can only stand in support of that work, maintaining the vigil and refusing to let the name of the victim or the importance of the case fade. We have the responsibility to remember, not just the tragedy, but the girl herself, her laughter, her dreams, and the simple, innocent act of riding a bike on a Saturday afternoon. We keep her memory alive by ensuring that the search for her killer remains an active, vital component of our public safety priorities. We keep it alive by talking about the importance of the Amber Alert, by supporting the institutions that fight for the missing, and by never, ever accepting that the silence of 30 years is a permanent condition. The path forward for the Arlington police, for the family of the victim, and for the public at large is one of continued commitment. We must be prepared for the possibility that the truth might look different than we expect. It might come through a late-breaking genetic match, an unexpected confession, or a breakthrough in the way we interpret the data we have held for so long. or it might come in a way that we cannot currently conceive. But regardless of the form it takes, the pursuit itself is what matters. The act of seeking is the act of honoring. We are, in a very profound sense, the guardians of this story now. We are the ones who bear witness to the fact that Amber Hagerman existed, that she was loved, and that her life was brutally taken. By remembering her, by keeping the investigation in the public consciousness, we are asserting that she mattered, that the crime against her was not forgotten, and that the search for justice is a core, non-negotiable value of our society. In the final analysis, the case of Amber Hagerman is a narrative of resilience. It is a story of how a small, suburban neighborhood in Texas became the epicenter of a movement that would eventually span the globe. It is a story of how a single life, cut short by unimaginable cruelty, became the catalyst for a protection that has touched millions. The tragedy is immense, and the lack of closure remains a heavy, constant burden, but the legacy is one that has saved lives, changed laws, and forced us all to become better, more vigilant citizens. The story is a testament to the fact that even in the face of the darkest, most terrifying events, the human spirit is capable of organizing, of protecting, and of continuing the search for truth, no matter how long the road may be. The girl on the pink bicycle has left us a task that we are still working to fulfill, and it is a task we will carry until the day that justice is finally served. Until then, the search continues, the memory remains, and the promise of the truth keeps us moving forward, step by steady step, through the long, enduring shadow of the past, towards the light of an eventual, inevitable, and righteous conclusion. The silence may have lasted for 3 decades, but it is not a silence that will hold forever. The truth is patient, the evidence is waiting, and the story of Amber Hagerman will continue to be told until the final page is turned, the mystery is solved, and the girl who is taken is finally brought into the peace of a concluded, honest, and total justice. The final, lingering resonance of the Amber Hagerman story is not found in the resolution of her murder, but in the enduring, quiet persistence of those who carry the burden of her memory. For 30 years, the case has served as a crucible for the evolution of modern forensic science, legal policy, and social awareness. It is a story that has defied the constraints of a traditional cold case by refusing to fade into the background, instead becoming a permanent, haunting reference point in our collective cultural consciousness. As we stand in the present, looking back at that cold January afternoon in 1996, we are forced to grapple with the reality that the search for justice is not merely an institutional duty, but a deeply personal, societal commitment that requires a constant, active engagement from all of us. The detectives who have devoted their careers to the Hagerman file do not view their work as a history project. They view it as a living, breathing investigation that is only one breakthrough away from being solved. This unwavering dedication is the bridge between the tragedy of the past and the potential for a breakthrough in the future, providing a steady, reliable light that prevents the case from being swallowed by the passage of time. To truly understand the trajectory of this investigation is to understand the profound shift in the way we, as a society, process the unthinkable. Before Amber, child abduction was an issue often confined to the private sphere, dealt with behind the closed doors of family homes and local police stations. After Amber, it became a public emergency. The transformation of her death into the catalyst for the Amber Alert system was an act of communal resilience that effectively redefined the limits of public safety. We learned that the eyes and ears of a populace are more powerful than the resources of any single department, and that in the urgent, high-stakes minutes following an abduction, the cooperation of the community is the most critical variable for success. This lesson has saved over 1,200 lives, turning a singular moment of horror into a massive, global network of protection. Yet, even as we celebrate the efficacy of this system, we are never truly allowed to forget its origin. The name Amber is the permanent reminder that the systems we use to protect our children are built on the foundation of a life that we failed to save. This creates a peculiar, enduring dissonance that dictates the character of the ongoing investigation. We are caught in a cycle of gratitude for the alert system and a sense of profound injustice regarding the unsolved status of the kidnapping itself. This tension is what makes the story of Amber Hagerman so incredibly powerful and so difficult to ever truly close. It is a case that demands an answer, a case that will not allow us to sleep soundly as long as the perpetrator remains at large. The investigators in Arlington understand this better than anyone. They work with the awareness that every day they continue the work is an acknowledgement of the debt we owe to the young girl who was taken from her bicycle. They are the guardians of the evidence, the curators of the hope that the truth will eventually be unearthed. They are, in a sense, the keepers of the flame, ensuring that no matter how much time passes, the pursuit of the killer remains a priority. The future of the case is now inextricably linked to the rapid advancement of genetic genealogy and forensic innovation. As our ability to sequence DNA from degraded, historical samples continues to improve, the barrier between the past and the present becomes increasingly porous. We have moved from a time where the physical environment of Forest Hill Creek could destroy the chances of a conviction to a time where even the most microscopic, damaged traces of biological material can be teased out, analyzed, and compared against national genealogical databases. This shift represents the final, best hope for a breakthrough. It is a technological inevitability that eventually the right match will be found, that the identity of the monster will be revealed, and that the long, painful silence of the investigation will finally be shattered. This is the promise that keeps the case alive, the promise that the truth is not lost forever, just waiting to be identified by the right tool at the right moment. But beyond the science and the policy, there is the human element that keeps the case alive. It is the family of Amber, who have lived with the weight of her absence every single day since she was taken. It is the community of Arlington, which has never let the memory of the young girl fade from its civic life. It is the law enforcement professionals who have rotated through the file, each one taking up the mantle of the investigation with the same fierce determination to see it through to the end. This human thread is what prevents the case from becoming cold, what makes it a vital, active concern of the community. We are all participants in the memory of Amber, and as long as we hold that memory, we are part of the process of seeking justice. The story of the girl on the pink bicycle is not just a true crime narrative. It is a story of how we, as a society, protect our most vulnerable and how we refuse to let the perpetrators of violence define the outcome of our history. We look back at the events of January 1996 not with a sense of helplessness, but with a sense of perspective. We see how far we have come, how many lives have been saved, and how the infrastructure of our safety has been strengthened in the wake of the loss. We also see how much remains to be done, how the search for justice is a slow, methodical process that requires the collective patience of a society that has decided that the truth matters. We are not just waiting for an arrest. We are actively engaging in the work of keeping the memory of Amber present. We are ensuring that the case remains a priority, that the resources are available, and that the pressure on the killer to remain hidden is never allowed to subside. The investigation is a living testament to the fact that we have not forgotten, that we are still watching, and that we are still looking for the man in the dark pickup truck. The final realization of this journey is that the story of Amber Hagerman is fundamentally unfinished. We have no way of knowing when the breakthrough will occur or what form it will take, but we are certain that it will come. The truth is not a fleeting, intangible thing. It is a solid, historical reality that is currently buried under 30 years of silence. It is waiting to be brought into the light. And when that day finally arrives, when the identity of the killer is announced and the final chapter of the investigation is written, it will not just be a victory for the legal system. It will be a victory for everyone who has ever cared about the safety of a child. It will be the final, necessary piece of the puzzle that has haunted the nation for 3 decades. Until then, we continue the vigil. We continue the search. We continue to hold the memory of Amber Hagerman in the highest, most respectful regard, knowing that the work we do today is what ensures the justice of tomorrow. The silence may be long, and the path may be arduous, but the commitment is absolute. We have learned that the protection of the innocent is the highest calling of our society, and we have learned that the pursuit of truth is a responsibility that we cannot abdicate. The story of the girl on the pink bicycle has become the story of our collective vigilance, a story that defines who we are and what we value. It is a story that has saved lives and changed the world, and it is a story that will not be closed until the last question has been answered and the final piece of the mystery has been put in its place. The investigation continues, the memory remains, and the promise of justice is, and will always be, the light that guides us through the shadows. The girl who was taken in Arlington, Texas, is not just a victim of a crime. She is the guardian of our children, the symbol of our collective resolve, and the reason we will never stop searching until the truth is finally brought home. The case of Amber Hagerman is a narrative of endurance, a narrative of the persistent, unyielding belief in the power of justice, and a narrative that will continue to resonate through the years until the final, definitive word is spoken. The search is not over. It is only just beginning to reach the moment where the truth can no longer be hidden from the world. The journey through the harrowing landscape of the Amber Hagerman case concludes not with a finality that offers comfort, but with the solemn, unwavering recognition that justice is a process defined more by the duration of its pursuit than by the speed of its arrival. For 3 decades, the name Amber has resonated through the halls of justice, the corridors of newsrooms, and the hearts of families who live with the chilling awareness of how easily safety can be shattered. As we reflect on these 10 chapters of investigation, tragedy, and systemic transformation, we're forced to acknowledge that we are still standing in the midst of an active, ongoing struggle. The case is not a closed book resting on a shelf of historical curiosities. It is a vital, breathing file that demands our attention, our empathy, and our collective commitment to the truth. The story of the girl on the pink bicycle has transcended its original, agonizing boundaries to become the foundational mythos of child safety in the modern era, yet the fundamental mystery of her abduction remains the dark star around which all these efforts continue to orbit. To consider the legacy of this case is to recognize the sheer scale of the shift in our social consciousness. Before January of 1996, we existed in a state of relative innocence regarding the vulnerability of our children to spontaneous, predatory violence. We believed in the safety of our suburban spaces, in the reliability of our neighborhood social contracts, and in the resilience of the quiet, American life. Amber's abduction and subsequent murder stripped away those illusions with a brutal, clinical efficiency. The subsequent birth of the Amber Alert system was an act of profound, communal creation, a way to build a shield from the very tools of communication that had previously been indifferent to our private sorrows. This system, which has now reached into the homes and pockets of millions, stands as the most tangible, life-saving monument to a life stolen. Every child recovered, every alert broadcast, and every life-saving intervention made possible by this technology is a quiet, persistent echo of Amber's existence. She lives on in the safety of others, in the vigilance of parents, and in the rapid, unified response of a society that has decided that the abduction of a child is an intolerable act. However, the dissonance between this massive, life-saving success and the unresolved nature of the original crime remains the most significant and difficult aspect of the narrative. We find ourselves in a position where we have successfully built an armor for the future while failing to solve the tragedy of the past. This is the burden we carry, and it is the burden that the Arlington Police Department continues to shoulder with such persistent, quiet integrity. They understand that their work is not finished simply because the system works. They know that the perpetrator of the original crime still walks this world, whether in freedom or in memory. The persistence of the investigation is a testament to the belief that justice is not a secondary concern to public safety, but an essential component of it. By continuing to pursue the killer of Amber Hagerman, the authorities are asserting that the value of an individual life is not diminished by the passage of time or the complexities of a cold case. They are confirming that the search for the truth is a non-negotiable, fundamental duty of a civilized society. As we look toward the horizon, we must also consider the role of the public in this ongoing search. The detectives have consistently reminded us that the key to solving a case that has gone cold for so long is often hidden in the memory of an ordinary person, someone who saw a detail, heard a comment, or witnessed an occurrence that they deemed insignificant at the time, but which could hold the key to the entire mystery. This is why the story must continue to be told. It is why we cannot allow the name of Amber Hagerman to be subsumed into the sterile shorthand of the Amber Alert acronym. We must remember her as a child, as a girl who loved the freedom of her bicycle, and as the daughter who was taken from her family on a sunny Saturday in Arlington. By keeping her memory human, by keeping her story present and alive, we create the best possible conditions for the truth to emerge. We keep the window of opportunity open, waiting for the right information to find its way to the detectives who are ready to receive it. The scientific advancement of our era offers a new, powerful lens through which we can view the fragments of evidence that were rescued from the debris of Forest Hill Creek. The progress in genetic genealogy, in molecular analysis, and in the integration of massive, national databases has fundamentally changed the nature of cold case investigations. We are no longer limited by the forensic tools of the 1990s. We are now capable of reading the past with a level of precision that would have seemed impossible at the time of the murder. This is the promise of the current investigation, the belief that the evidence, no matter how degraded or small, contains the definitive answer we have been searching for 30 years. We are in a race between time and technology, a race where the investigators are armed with the best of human ingenuity and the deepest, most persistent commitment to the cause of justice. As we close this exploration, we must reflect on what it means to truly honor the victim of such a crime. We honor her through the alert systems we maintain, through the safety we provide to our children, and through the refusal to give up on the search for her killer. But we also honor her by recognizing the profound, inescapable reality of what she endured. We honor her by refusing to look away from the darkness, even while we work toward the light of a solution. The case of Amber Hagerman is a narrative of our collective maturity as a society. It is the story of how we learn to be vigilant, how we learn to connect, and how we learn to demand better for our children. It is a story that has changed the world, even while the mystery at its heart remains stubbornly, hauntingly intact. We are the inheritors of this legacy, and we are the ones who must continue to carry the burden and the hope that defines it. The final word on this case has not yet been spoken. There is more to be discovered, more to be analyzed, and more to be reconciled. The silence that has surrounded the perpetrator of this crime is not a testament to his cleverness, but a temporary shroud that the passage of time and the persistence of justice will eventually tear away. The detectives in Arlington remain at their posts, the files remain active, and the memory of the young girl remains a vital, driving force for everyone involved. We remain in a state of watchful patience, knowing that the story of Amber Hagerman is far from over. It will continue until the day the truth is brought home, until the name of the monster is revealed, and until the final piece of the mystery is laid to rest. In the meantime, we stand in solidarity with the family, with the investigators, and with the memory of the girl who was taken, forever committed to the pursuit of the answers that will finally and completely bring the light of justice to the darkness of the past. The search for the killer of Amber Hagerman is a commitment that defines our best selves, and it is a commitment that we will sustain until the very end, ensuring that her life, her story, and her legacy remain protected, honored, and ultimately vindicated by the absolute and unwavering truth. The truth is waiting, the evidence is present, and the path to justice, however long and however obscured by the shadows of the past, remains the only path we are willing to travel. The final summation of the Amber Hagerman case is a testament to the endurance of the human spirit in the face of profound, soul-shattering tragedy. For 30 years, the absence of an arrest has not equated to an absence of action. Rather, it has defined a new era of vigilance and scientific rigor that continues to evolve. As we contemplate the totality of this narrative, we see that the true measure of the investigation is not found in a single, climactic moment of resolution, but in the relentless, daily accumulation of efforts designed to keep the possibility of justice alive. The case has become an indelible part of the American landscape, a somber marker of how the unthinkable can reshape the structural foundations of society. We have moved from the raw, unbuffered grief of 1996 to a sophisticated, modern era where every scrap of evidence is treated with the reverence of a holy relic and every technological advancement is immediately applied to the gaps in our knowledge. The detectives of the Arlington Police Department, along with their partners in the federal government, operate with a sober understanding that they are not just solving a crime. They are upholding a promise made to a little girl and a family who have waited 3 decades for the truth to be spoken. To reflect on this lengthy, arduous investigation is to realize that the passage of time is both the enemy of the case and its greatest catalyst for renewal. While the decades have allowed memories to fade and suspects to slip into the shadows, they have also ushered in the era of high-resolution genetic genealogy, allowing us to ask questions of the evidence that were impossible to formulate in the 90s. The resilience of the physical evidence, surviving the trauma of the creek, the degradation of storage, and the inevitable decay of biological material, is a minor miracle in itself. It is a tangible link to the perpetrator, a genetic fingerprint that remains patient, waiting for the moment when the databases of the modern world finally produce a match. This is the hope that sustains the investigation, the belief that the perpetrator has not left the human story entirely, that his descendants or his distant relations may unknowingly hold the key that will finally unlock the mystery. The persistence of this hope is what distinguishes a cold case from a dead case, and it is the primary engine of the Arlington investigation. We must also consider the profound impact that the ongoing search for justice has had on the community at large. The case has fostered a culture of shared responsibility, where the protection of the vulnerable is no longer a peripheral concern, but a core value of our public life. The Amber Alert system, born from the depths of this tragedy, has become a global standard, a beacon of what is possible when a grieving community refuses to succumb to hopelessness. It is a legacy that honors the girl she was, not just the victim she became. Yet, even as we recognize this, we must remain grounded in the reality that the primary goal of the investigation remains the identification and apprehension of the man who ended her life. The success of the alert system does not mitigate the failure to solve the murder. Rather, it amplifies the need for a final, judicial accounting. We are not interested in a narrative that settles for half measures or symbolic gestures. We are interested in the truth, in its most naked and uncompromising form. The future of this investigation is mapped out in the continuous integration of data, the expansion of genealogical networks, and the refusal to let the file gather dust. We are looking at a process that has moved from the physical pursuit of dark pickup trucks to the digital pursuit of genetic patterns. This transition is essential. It reflects the reality of a world that is more interconnected than ever before, where a person's genetic footprint can be traced across states and continents. The investigators are utilizing these tools with a level of precision and patience that is nothing short of extraordinary. They are working with the knowledge that the perpetrator likely never imagined that the advancements of the 21st century would eventually reach back into the past and drag his crimes into the light. This is the ultimate, long-game strategy of the law, a slow and methodical closing of a net that has been tightened with every new advancement in forensic technology. We must also acknowledge the role of the public in this ongoing vigil. The case of Amber Hagerman belongs to everyone, as does the obligation to keep its memory fresh. Every time the story is retold, every time a new generation learns the history of the Amber Alert, the pressure on the hidden truth increases. The anonymity of the perpetrator is fragile. It relies on the continued silence of those who might know him and on the failure of the public to maintain its interest. By refusing to forget, by insisting that this case remains a national priority, we are actively eroding the perpetrator's safety. We are keeping the pressure on, ensuring that no stone is left unturned and no potential witness is allowed to assume that the case has been abandoned. This is a communal act of defiance against the cruelty that took Amber from us. As we look ahead, we have to recognize that the final resolution might come in an unexpected form. It might be a match in a database that reveals the killer's identity long after he has passed away, or it might be a sudden, dramatic confession prompted by a change in circumstance. Regardless of how the truth surfaces, its arrival will be a monumental event, a validation of the work that has been done and a final, necessary act of justice for the victim. The path to this outcome is narrow and long, but it is a path that we are walking together. The Arlington Police Department, the victim's family, and the millions of people who've been alerted to the importance of child safety are all stakeholders in this final act. We are witnessing a historic commitment to the truth, a commitment that will not falter as long as there is even the slightest hope of a resolution. The story of the girl on the pink bicycle has reached a point where the only remaining narrative arc is the one that leads to the truth. We have moved past the initial shock, past the era of legislative reform, and into the era of technical, meticulous, and persistent search. We are operating in the space between the tragedy of the past and the justice of the future, a space that is defined by the absolute necessity of an answer. The silence of 30 years has been a heavy, suffocating weight, but it is a silence that we are collectively breaking. Every day is an opportunity for a breakthrough, and every day is a reminder of why we continue the fight. The memory of Amber Hagerman is not fading. It is hardening into a resolve that will not be moved until the case is solved. In the final assessment, the case of Amber Hagerman stands as a profound, unending inquiry into the nature of justice in an indifferent world. It is a story of how the most tragic of losses can ignite a fire of change that warms and protects millions, while also serving as a stark, burning reminder of the work that remains to be done. We honor the girl who is taken by continuing to hold the door open for the truth to walk through. We honor her by refusing to treat her story as a closed chapter and by insisting that the search for her killer is a living, breathing component of our civic duty. We move forward with the knowledge that we are closer to the truth than we have ever been, and that the long, long road of investigation is one that we will travel until the end. The search for the truth is not an optional endeavor. It is the fundamental obligation of a society that values the life of every single child. We will continue this, we will hold this vigil, and we will wait for the moment when the past is finally reconciled with the present. The truth will be told, the killer will be identified, and the story of Amber Hagerman will finally and completely reach its rightful, honest conclusion. This is the promise we have made to her, and it is a promise that we will keep, no matter how many more years it takes for the light of justice to finally break through the darkness. The search is the victory, and the truth is the final destination we seek.